From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NoCo, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Tuesday, March 26th. I'm Erin O'Toole. The need to screen students for learning disabilities is on the rise in Northern Colorado, and mental health providers are having trouble meeting the demand. Mary Beth Rigali-Oiler is a child and adolescent psychologist with the Health District of Northern Larimer County. She says finding answers isn't always straightforward either.
So when we talk about learning disabilities, there is very specific testing looking at learning and achievement. However, when you're looking at, is there an underlying learning disability, you also have to kind of a broad net to see, well, is it actually ADHD? Is it actually anxiety? Is it because this child fell behind during COVID and just hasn't had the intervention to catch up?
When kids don't get the screenings they need, questions about why they're struggling persist. Parents are also left to wonder when, say, kids are anxious about going to class, known as school refusal. Is it a learning disability? Is it mental health? Or is it something else? I sat down with Rigali-Oiler to learn more. I began by asking her about the factors fueling this problem.
In Northern Colorado, there is a large demand for psychological testing, and there's not enough providers. There's a couple of reasons for that. So we're seeing an increase in families having concerns about their child and their ability to learn. And part of that is because of the post-COVID effect. So we know that children had a loss of learning during that time, and it disproportionately impacted children depending on what their learning was looking like during that time. So some children had access to tutors or had access to a parent or a caregiver at home to provide direct learning, and other children did not have that type of opportunity. And so the disparities that we saw before COVID related to learning, we're seeing more of that in the past few years. And so parents are concerned.
Right. I wonder if you're observing trends in terms of a rise or fall in learning disabilities.
That's a great question. I think it's been difficult to piece that apart. And I think the schools are also struggling with understanding what is the reason for the underachievement, because a lot of the kids are also still experiencing a lot of anxiety and depression. A lot of school refusal has increased. And so is this child unable to read because they weren't given access to education for a whole year? Is it because they were not involved in preschool and so they came into kindergarten without those pre-academic skills, and teachers are just starting with just getting kids up to speed with those beginner kindergarten skills? So I think that yes, we're seeing an increase in concern about whether or not this is a learning disability, but is it truly a learning disability, or is it a combination of environmental factors and those social emotional factors, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it sounds like there are limitations with testing in
Yes,
itself.
absolutely. Because a student might perform below grade level, but that only gives you part of the picture. We need to also understand all the parts of that student, not just what their reading scores are, but also, are they able to have attention and focus? Are they having increased anxiety? Is there is there trauma? Is there grief that's going on that's impacting that student's ability to learn in the classroom?
Right. I want to talk about the impact of students not getting the screening that they need. Could you talk about an example from your own work of what happens when they don't get this kind of screening? It seems like there are a lot of cascading effects to that.
Definitely, especially because in school, as you know, learning is building on itself. And so if a child is already a little bit behind in kindergarten and they are still in school on the regular track, not getting intervention, they're just going to fall further and further behind. We see this critical year around second grade because really curriculum is looking to teach reading from kindergarten through second. And then by third grade, you're reading to learn at that point, not learning to read. And so when students are not grasping those fundamental skills in those first critical years of learning, they really can fall behind by third grade. And the ripple effect of not liking school, students having negative self-beliefs about themselves, really starts to cascade, as you mentioned.
Sure. Well, what do parents need to know about navigating learning disability testing? Because clearly they are going to be their child's biggest advocate.
Absolutely. I always encourage families to keep an open conversations with the school. So talking with your child's teacher, talking with the school counselor, talking with the school psychologist or assistant principal, because those teachers are going to have the best understanding of the factors that are influencing their child's learning. And a lot of times parents may not feel like they have the right to ask, or they're nervous about asking, but really parents being involved in that process at school is so important. And even if you do testing outside in the community, like at Kayak with me or one of my colleagues in the community, we are always getting teacher feedback. We're always connecting with the school to understand what interventions have been attempted in the classroom, how is the student progressing, if not, what other factors are impacting them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think needs to change? What needs to happen to really make a dent in this problem?
I think it's multifold. I do think that insurance is a large barrier for families. So if a family is looking for paying for a psychological evaluation in the community, that could be anywhere between $1,500 and $3,000. Insurance typically does not pay for learning disability testing. So that's another layer to this. Insurance companies will often pay for testing related to ADHD or anxiety or depression or autism. But with learning disability testing, that can be really difficult to get reimbursement for unless you're also testing for the other components. So thinking of a family who has, even if they do have insurance, a deductible of $5,000, $8,000, paying out of pocket $2,500 is just not possible for many families. And so I think that having some societal change on insurance is important. And then I also think that families feeling welcome into the school to have these conversations. Because what I've seen in my practice is that oftentimes families are really concerned, and there's a disconnect between the family's concerns and questions they have on their child's learning and maybe what's happening at the school level. So I think the more collaboration and open communication between families and schools, I think will just serve their students that much better.
Sure. Mary Beth Rigali-Oiler is with the Health District of Northern Larimer County. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And are you a parent with school-age kids? We want to know what questions are on your mind about your child's schooling, whether it's screening for learning disabilities or something else. Send us an email at noco@kunc.org. That's it for us today here on In the NoCo. We'll be back tomorrow with more of what's happening in Northern Colorado. Our producer is Ariel Lavery. Robin Vincent is our executive producer. I'm your host, Erin O'Toole. We'll see you next time.